1. All right. So, this is our presentation on how Christianity shaped the Middle Ages by Brandon Wallace and William Branham. So first we start with Paul and his mission. Paul was one of the 12 disciples that followed Jesus of Nazareth. After Jesus' crucifixion and his resurrection, Paul set course throughout the Roman Empire, teaching the lessons of Christ to non-Gentiles. And non-Gentiles are considered non-Jews, which is really different from what Jesus taught, because Jesus taught to only Jews in synagogues and in Jewish homes, which this separates Christianity from Judaism, and which made Paul the founder of Christianity. Paul contributed to Christianity and the Bible by spreading the word of the God, traveling all over. He clocked up to 10,000 miles of around the Roman Empire. And his most important works contributing to the Bible are 1 Thessalonians, Galatians, Philemon, Philippians, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, and Roman, which are all books of the Bible. Then Rome fell. Rome fell due to the barbaric invasions of the so massive territory that could not be defended. And after it fell, the western and eastern parts established a central church to take center of power and control over the territories. Now, they didn't want one central church like they did an emperor in Rome. So they came up with, we'll put one in each side, and one in the eastern territory and one in the western territory. Now, Catholicism claimed the religion, the denomination of Christianity, but the Western ideologies differ from the Western idea or Eastern ideas, causing the Catholic religion to split into two churches. In the West, Roman Catholicism would control the Western world. And in the East, Eastern Orthodox Catholicism would control the East.
So now there's Gregory I the Great. Gregory was actually born rich and was a grandchild to two previous popes. He was not until he became the prefect of Rome that his devotion to Christianity flourished, making his family palace into a monastery. He served as the Pope of Holy Roman Empire from 590 to 604. That was the time of his death. And then he reformed and established Christianity's influence throughout Western Europe. During his reign as Pope, he organized systematic relief for the poor. He also reformed the church by granting the church to have as much authority or more than the state, removing high officials from misdeeds, forced celibacy, established the papal system that is still used today when electing a new pope, and converted Anglo-Saxons in England to Christianity while adopting pagan customs to ensure conversion to Catholicism. Now, this is just a short video that me and Will made about the Crusades, about 5 minutes long.
The Crusades were military campaigns waged by Western European Christians during the Middle Ages for the defense and expansion of Christendom. What made a crusade distinct was that warriors involved in the fighting received spiritual merit, usually a plenary indulgence granted by the Pope. A crusade was considered by Western European Christians to be a holy act, an act of sacrifice and piety for the love of Christ. 4 centuries before the beginning of the Crusades, the first Muslim armies swept out of Arabia to conquer Palestine, Syria, Mesopotamia, Egypt, North Africa, and Spain, some 2/3 of the Christian world. Between the 7th and 11th centuries, Christians fought wars against Muslims to prevent them from making further conquests into Christian territory, or to reconquer what had already been captured. In Spain, Christian kingdoms waged wars to recapture their homeland from the Arabs, while the Byzantine Empire in the east was engaged in centuries of war with the Muslims for control of Anatolia and other regions. In the 11th century, the Seljuk Turks, recent converts to Islam, swept through Syria and Palestine. In 1071, they defeated the Byzantines at the Battle of Manzikert, conquering almost all of Anatolia. In response, Pope Urban II called the First Crusade, asking knights from all over Europe to band together and push back the Seljuks. Over the 12th and 13th centuries, the popes called more crusades to the Holy Land and also called for crusades in Spain to help push back the Muslim powers. Crusades against Muslims were not called with the intention of converting them to Christianity. Rather, they were called to regain control of territory that had been previously Christian but had fallen to Muslim armies. Jerusalem had been conquered by the Muslims in 637 and was considered particularly important to Western Christians since it was the site of Christ's crucifixion. Indeed, Jerusalem was revered as the holiest site in the Christian cosmos, and it was particularly important to Western Europeans that it be brought again under Christian rule. When in the 11th century, news arrived that Christian pilgrims traveling to Jerusalem were being harassed and killed by the Seljuk Turks, this fact alone inspired many knights to join the First Crusade. Although the Crusades were called to reclaim lands, greed was not a primary motivation. Professor Jonathan Riley Smith, the world's foremost expert on Crusades history, has proven that crusading was incredibly dangerous and expensive, and that virtually none of the knights who went could expect to gain wealth. Indeed, they often bankrupted themselves crusading. The primary motivation for crusading was spiritual, with the knights joining because they believed that they were doing God's work by fighting to protect Christian pilgrims and to reclaim holy sites like Jerusalem, and that involving themselves in a crusade would win them spiritual merit. The Crusades to the Holy Land saw many failures but also many successes. The First Crusade and the Third Crusade, for example, were both very successful, though ultimately later, at the close of the 13th century, the last Crusader holdings in Syria and Palestine would be captured by the Muslim Mamluk Empire. However, the Crusades in Spain achieved lasting victory, with the whole of Spain being ultimately recaptured by the Christians. Later crusades would also be called against the Ottoman Turks, such as the Crusade of Lepanto in 1571. If you want to learn more about the Crusades,
And so that's basically our video, and we'll continue to notable crusade figures.
So some notable crusade figures, and if you notice the pictures on the left, if you go from top to bottom, left to right is the way the list is going. Bernard of Clovix, a Cistercian monk who, much like Peter the Hermit, played a critical role in convincing people to participate in the Second Crusade. Pope Urban II, the Pope who in 1095 sent out a call to all faithful Christians, and Saladin, Muslim general and leader of Egypt and Syria. After his recapture of Jerusalem in 1187, he was forced to defend his new territories against the participants of the Third Crusade, including his famous counterpart, King Richard the Lionheart.
And the next is Peter the Hermit. He was actually a French preacher whose passionate words convinced tens of thousands of supporters to follow him to the Holy Lands, welcoming the First Crusade. Godfrey of Bouillon, he was a French knight and one of the chief leaders of the First Crusade. He actually developed a reputation as a perfect Christian knight. And the most famous of all crusaders, Richard the Lionheart. He was actually an English king who won many battles against the Muslim armies of Saladin and recaptured much land, but he actually could not win back Jerusalem. And that is our PowerPoint, and we would like to thank you guys for listening to us, and I hope you guys learned something.